Too late. Much, much too late. Those Western states who have aided and abetted Israel's crimes from the very start are trying to parade their consciences to the world. They're panicking a bit. Why? Because they're now fully aware that the sheer scale of horror being unleashed against the Palestinian people by the Israeli state is impossible to suppress, and that even greater horror is yet to come. And they know that, as it turns out, their voters aren't all a bunch of sociopaths, that despite the monstrous dehumanisation of the Palestinian people, despite the media coverage which has been overall, with brave exceptions, nothing short of a disgrace, erasing the actual scale of the atrocities being committed, that despite all of that, most people don't actually like watching tens of thousands of innocent civilians, many of them children, being butchered and starved to death. Let's listen first to Joe Biden, who has been nicknamed Genocide Joe because of how he has directly aided and abetted this from the very start.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top.
Over the top. Over the top. That's one way of putting it. And we'll come on to what over the top means right now in practice, and crucially what the involvement of Biden and the US has been in this over the top response. Meanwhile, John Feiner, a deputy national security advisor, reportedly told Arab American leaders in Michigan, crucially in a closed meeting, obviously you can't say this in public, that the administration had made mistakes, declaring, "We are very well aware that we have missteps in the course of responding to this crisis since October 7th. Missteps, that's one way of describing what's happened. Woefully too little. Woefully too late. Who next? Oh, the German state. Let's talk about them. Their foreign minister is Annalena Baerbock, and she tweets, "Already the suffering of Rafah is unfathomable. In an extremely confined space, 1.3 million people are seeking shelter from the fighting. A large-scale IDF offensive in Rafah would be a humanitarian catastrophe in the making. The people of Gaza cannot vanish into thin air." She goes on, "Israel must defend itself against Hamas. At the same time, it must do whatever it can to alleviate civilian suffering. That's why another humanitarian pause is needed, also to finally get the hostages home. How to get there will be on my agenda when I visit Israel next week." Let's just deal with the first part, shall we? Germany has backed Israel's mass slaughter from the very beginning. Why? Because within living memory, the German state attempted to exterminate the entire Jewish population of Europe and murdered 2/3 of them, and then elected to make the Palestinian people pay for that crime. Well, Annalena Baerbock, the people of Gaza, of course, will not vanish into thin air, and you know that. They will suffer hideous violent deaths at the hands of the Israeli state. They will be blown apart by bombs or riddled with bullets. They will be starved, deprived of clean water, exposed to the elements for lack of shelter. They will die of treatable medical conditions because Gaza's medical system has been destroyed by the Israeli state. All of this, in part, because of you, the German state, both historically, but crucially in the here and now, because of the cover you have offered the Israeli state. And more to the point, your authorities have targeted and silenced over and over again those voices who have sought to oppose the mass murder you now fret over, including, it must be said, hugely courageous Jewish people who have spoken out. You say Israel must defend itself against Hamas, followed by, at the same time, it must do whatever it can to alleviate civilian suffering, even though, as anyone by this point knows, unless they are either terminally disingenuous or terminally stupid, or, to be fair, indeed both, mass civilian suffering is integral to how Israel has defined defending itself against Hamas. A humanitarian pause, otherwise known as stopping the killing for a week or two and then resume it all over again. Now let's just discuss what they're all panicking about. At the very start, the Israeli state ordered the Palestinian population of northern Gaza to flee. This was the war crime of forcible displacement. The claim was that actually the south would be safe. This was a lie, and indeed by late December, Israel used 2,000-pound bombs on area it had designated safe for civilians to evacuate at least 200 times. The Palestinian population of Gaza, in large part, were driven to Khan Yunis. Then it was attacked, and then they fled to Rafah in the very south, on the border of Egypt. The pre-war population of Rafah was 280,000. Now, more than half of Gaza's 2.2 or 2.3 million people have been driven there. So yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister's office tweeted, "It is impossible to achieve the goal of the war of eliminating Hamas by leaving 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah. On the contrary, it is clear that intense activity in Rafah requires that civilians evacuate the areas of combat. Therefore, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the IDF and the security establishment to submit to the cabinet a combined plan for evacuating the population and destroying the battalions." Where? Where are they supposed to flee to? Where? There is nowhere for them to go. Nowhere. As Germany knows and the United States knows. That's the reason for the panic, isn't it? A ground invasion of Rafah will be a epic, horrifying humanitarian catastrophe. Mass death. And indeed, there's every reason to believe Israel is actually seeking to drive the Palestinian population into Egypt's Sinai desert in a murderous act of ethnic cleansing to empty Gaza of its Palestinian population. In any case, this will constitute mass murder. Now listen to the courageous Israeli journalist Gideon Levy, who I've interviewed.
Do you think US concerns are likely to make any real difference to what Benjamin Netanyahu is planning?
No, as long as the US remarks are only remarks or concerns and they are not followed by practical measures, Israel will ignore it. Excuse me for my voice, but I'm still fine. In any case, Israel learns to ignore advices. If the United States wants to prevent the next catastrophe, and Rafah is going to be a major catastrophe, the US has to be precise and take measures. Otherwise, it will not work.
So when I just read out the latest line from Israel's prime minister ordering his military to plan ways to evacuate civilians in Rafah so he can carry out the intention to target Hamas, what do you make of that? Is that just words? Is that to deflect some of the criticism that is already coming his way, do you think?
I want to ask you where to.
And that's the point. There is nowhere for them to go. But all of this is happening with US complicity because their words mean nothing. They could pull the plug with their actions at any moment, yet they choose not to. Meanwhile, Philippe Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, the UN mission in charge of the welfare of Palestinian refugees, the main humanitarian agency in Gaza, which Western states have financially throttled based on completely unevidenced Israeli claims, he has declared that Israel is blocking a month's supply of food for 1.1 million Palestinians in Gaza at Ashdod port. Israel has apparently, according to him, ordered the contractor not to move it. According to the UN's humanitarian coordination agency OCHA, more than half the aid missions in northern Gaza were denied access last month, with Israeli forces increasingly interfering with the delivery of aid. Residents are now resorting to grinding animal feed into flour to survive, but they're running out of those grains too. Acute malnutrition amongst the young children of Gaza is surging. As the World Food Programme regional chief, Matt Hollingworth, says, we know there is a very serious risk of famine in Gaza if we don't provide very significant volumes of food assistance on a regular basis. As Médecins Sans Frontières report, according to UNICEF, at least half of the water and sanitation facilities in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged, while UNRWA reports that around 70% of people in Gaza are drinking salinized or contaminated water. Meanwhile, Israeli soldiers keep broadcasting their war crimes on TikTok, showing how much they are relishing and reveling in the mass slaughter and destruction of Gaza. That means the mass murder of innocent civilians. Let's just talk about one example. On the 29th of January, a 6-year-old girl called Hind Rajab rang the Palestine Red Crescent begging them to save her. She was surrounded by the bodies of her dead relatives, her uncle, her aunt, her cousins. Her 15-year-old cousin, Layan Hamadesh, she'd rung them first, telling them her parents and siblings had been killed. They are shooting at us. The tank is next to me, she reported. Her call was cut off by what sounded like gunfire. So this little 6-year-old girl rang, begging the Red Crescent, come take me, you will come and take me. I'm so scared, please come. She said it was getting dark, and she was scared of the dark. An ambulance crew was sent out to rescue her by the Red Crescent. its coordinates shared with the Israeli military. But contact was lost with them and with Hind. And today, the burned out ambulance was found, the ambulance workers murdered, and the car just nearby with the badly decomposed bodies of Hind and her loved ones. What do you say? What do you say? That such horror on an unimaginable scale is being tolerated speaks to the total dehumanization of the Palestinian people. If these were people who were seen as people like us, not even a fraction of this would be tolerated. But crucially, all of this happened and is happening because the United States and its Western allies allowed it to happen every step of the way. The Biden administration specifically gave Israel the weapons it needed, bypassing Congress to do so, and gave it diplomatic and political cover. Biden himself used his platform, the biggest megaphone on earth, to claim atrocities on 7th of October, not to deny that war crime did happen on 7th of October, but atrocities which never happened, like the beheadings of Israeli babies, to justify the onslaught against Gaza which then happened. So yes, a massacre of Rafah now beckons, and the US and its allies are very clear about that. The people of Gaza are beginning to starve to death. And so the governments which allowed this to happen are panicking about the reputational consequences for them, because if they cared about Palestinian life, they would have made very different choices from beginning to end. Well, it's too late. Everything that's happened is on them. And the horrors that are yet to happen are on them as well. Please like and subscribe. Do share this video. Keep the show on the road on patreon.com/Jones84. Listen to the podcast. Speak to you soon.